She is depicted in this particular picture with the Lord Ganesha, the elephant god, right behind her. I think it's so wonderful and so beautiful to realize that in these more ancient cultures that they have this wonderful lore which comes from somewhere. You all know that old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? It's true. People don't just make this stuff up. You know, I mean, there's truth to it. Lakshmi, if you want to go into the real Hindu background of her, is the so-called consort or feminine side of the god Vishnu. He is known as the Lord of Preservation. He preserves. In some beliefs of Hinduism, and by the way, there are many because they're so wonderfully tolerant, there are three main gods, and they will tell you that there is Brahma, the creator, who creates new things that need to come into being to fulfill the laws of evolution. Then there is the Lord Vishnu, the preserver. He preserves what needs preserving until it has fulfilled its purpose. And finally there's the Lord Shiva, who is known as the destroyer, who stamps out that which has fulfilled its purpose. Lakshmi is known as the goddess of wealth. You see gold coins literally pouring out of her hands. She is the counterpart of Fortuna. She's the counterpart of Lady Luck in Las Vegas. Any of you know who that is? There is truth to all of this if you look at it the right way. I think that we're at a point, now that we're on the very verge of coming to the great new age of Aquarius, where we can afford to drop our blinders. We can afford to cast the bridle on intelligence into the gutter and start to think for ourselves. We've all been brought up with most of us anyway, I shouldn't say all, but most of us, some kind of a religious background. I don't care what it was, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish, it doesn't matter, or something else more exotic. But the point is that I think that what we come to find out and what the Great White Brotherhood is about is the conglomeration of all of it. What is the Great White Brotherhood if not that wonderful scene, I'll call it that. That scene that breaks upon the vision of every soul, that suddenly at some point you realize, oh my God, it's all real, isn't it? It's all true, isn't it? God provided a God and a goddess for everybody, no matter who, didn't he and she? It's like, yes, my child, that's the truth of it. And there's no one God or goddess that you have to accept. They're all there just like a huge, wonderful divine buffet. Isn't that beautiful? I love it. I love it. I happen to have Aquarius rising, by the way. So, I like the eclectic. The more the merrier. Can you tell me about some new God or goddess I haven't heard? You're high up on my list. Please, make my day. No, seriously, I mean it, because I know good and well that this is what the Great White Brotherhood is all about. The Great White Brotherhood is not about a race, obviously. We're not talking about white supremacy, believe me. That is the last thing that we want to think about here. I'm talking about white in the area of white light. What is white light? It's the mixture of all the other colors, isn't it? You put them all together, you get the white light. That's what it is. So the Great White Brotherhood is the wonderful conglomeration of all of them. And perhaps there's been no country of the world that has shown us so much of this as has India, Mother India. This wonderful, wonderful, wonderful country that has been the cradle of spirituality for centuries and centuries and centuries. Here we have a depiction of the Lord Shiva. I would say you would probably find that the majority of Hindus would recognize the Lord Shiva as a major, if not the major deity. If you look carefully at the picture, which is so beautiful and ornate, you will notice the beautiful white cord extending out of his head, depicting high and holy meditation. It is from India that we have come to find the depth of spirituality. Many people don't realize it, but pretty much every other religion, or many of them I should say, most of them, have somehow or another come out of India or Hinduism as its root. Look at Buddhism, and there are many, many sects of Buddhism, as you know, but the original so-called Buddha, the Lord Gautama Buddha, was in fact a Hindu. He was a Brahmin. Approximately 500 years BC, he walked out of a palace made for him and found that there was suffering and other things, and he began to explore that. Lord Shiva is known as the Lord of Yogis. You can imagine that to a so-called very sheltered, I guess is the word, Christian missionary, such a picture could actually be frightful. Oh my God, who's this? It isn't Jesus. Look at that, he's got long hair. Why, I don't know what it is. Is it a man or a woman? I'm scared. Must be the devil. Right away they come in all these, suppositions. But yet I say that, you'll talk to many a devout Hindu and they will tell you Shiva, or some will pronounce him Siva, is God. This is Lakshmi again, depicting the rich heritage of India. The lotus flower she's sitting in basically depicts the opening of the chakras, the 7 psychic centers of the body. This one happens to do with the chakra in the top of the head. Here we have the Lord Krishna. Now, when I say the word Krishna, everybody here thinks Hare Krishna, right? And not more than a block away from here, there is a Hare Krishna temple. They make wonderful lunch. You should go there sometime. I mean it. It's worth it. Believe me, it's wonderful. But, unfortunately, I know the Hare Krishna people have gotten a bad rap. Well, maybe they got a little too zealous, whatever. But I do know that the Lord Krishna was a very, very wonderful being, which brings us to the subject of what we call an avatar. What is an avatar? One of those wonderful beings who does not need to be on earth for their own purposes, but they come here for the help and good of other people. An avatar. Lord Krishna. He could divide himself into thousands and thousands of forms simultaneously. He incarnated in India, I think about 5000 BC approximately, and continues to be with us even to this present hour. Do you realize that to simply sit here and look at his image is to draw him in? Do you know that? I think it's important that we grow in our spiritual maturity, that we transcend our own small limits, whatever they may be, and get to a point of spiritual and cosmic sophistication where we don't see some being like this as foreign to us, but very much a part of the panoply of gods and goddesses that all lead up to the great white light, which has to do with that brotherhood of which I have spoken. As I said, India has been an incredible, wonderful cradle of spirituality. And even in so-called modern times, we don't have to go to ancient times, we have had her wonderful, wonderful contributions to the West. Even this, though, I would tell you, even this is a plan of that so-called Great White Brotherhood of which I speak. I'm not referring to a little corporation somewhere. I hope you know that, okay? They're in New York, New York. No, I'm not talking about that. They have no money to make. They have only bliss to achieve for all of humanity. This particular being that you're looking at, his name means that very thing. His name is Yogananda. His name means, Ananda means bliss. Yoga is union. They usually refer to as union with God. Yogananda means the bliss of union. This wonderful, wonderful, wonderful yogi came to the West, was one of the very first that came to the West in about the 1930s, I believe, maybe late 1920s, on a mission, on a wonderful mission to bring India to the West. And he did it. He started this thing called the Self-Realization Fellowship. And we need to stop right there because, again, the Great White Brotherhood obviously is quite conscious of the fact that the West needed spirituality, but they needed it far more deeply than they were experiencing it through simply Bible thumping. This is the good book and there's nothing else behind it and that's what you got to do. How many of us have heard this kind of thing? That's very okay, I guess, for some, but I really There's a point where you really quite outgrow that and you want to have direct experience. In India, it is quite well known that the goal of life is self-realization, capital S on that self. That means what? That through a series of lifetimes of contemplation, meditation, you come to realize that yourself, your true identity, is in fact divine, not human at all. He brought this wonderful, wonderful message to the West, and we've never been the same ever since. It's been a very wonderful path that he's brought us. Yogananda wrote an incredibly beautiful book that I suggest if you've never read it, you might want to pick it up. It's called The Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. Paramahansa is the name of a particular title that's given to a soul who's hit a certain level of development at a particular point in their spiritual initiation. He started like any one of us as a child, a boy in India, and had these incredibly beautiful experiences traveling, which in those days, in the 30s and 20s of India, he had met saint after saint, just wonderful beings. And by the way, may I interject here, he met a lot of beautiful women saints too. Because, we see all these men, unfortunately, those are the ones we have the pictures of, but there have been just as many women saints and lady masters as there are male ones. So I want to make that very clear. It's not a male-dominated thing. This was his guru. His name is Sri Yukteswar. Can I get a little clearer there? Is that about right? Something like that. Sri Yukteswar was a very powerful yogi, a great astrologer, and a great scholar of Hindu lore and also of Christian lore. And he's the one that enlightened Yogananda. And at one point, Yogananda literally bargained with this man. Now this is interesting. You won't find this happening in California that much, but it sure happened in India. Yogananda said, I will be your disciple. I will be your complete servant. On my hands and knees, you have to promise me that you will introduce me to God. Now, how many Christian ministers can you walk up to and make that kind of a deal with? You see what I'm saying? And Sri Yukteswar held off. And at one point he said, you drive a hard bargain. Be it as you will. And he agreed. Because he saw Yogananda's sincerity. And there came a beautiful, beautiful morning where he did what is called Diksha, which is called initiation. He simply touched Yogananda gently on the chest 3 times above the heart. And Yogananda had an experience in what's called cosmic consciousness. These are the things we're not taught about in school, are they? I wasn't. I majored in psychology thinking I'd learn something. What I'm sharing with you, I didn't learn in psychology, believe me. But I'm just sharing with you that these people have existed and do exist even to the present hour. This being was Sri Yukteswar's guru. For in India, you find what they call a lineage. A guru who teaches a student, who then becomes a guru, who then teaches his students, and on and on and on. It's very beautiful. There is a tradition that parallels that here in Hawaii, having to do with kumuhulas. You'll find a certain kumuhula, a teacher of hula, who will teach his or her students. They in turn become kumuhulas, and there it goes. For instance, there's a lady who lived here not long ago called Auntie Mikey Lake, and she was a wonderful kumuhula. She initiated various other kumuhulas, people like the Casimiros and Lena Alahaini and people, and now they're out there and they're kumuhulas, and it's the same thing, and it's very beautiful. It's very, very, very beautiful. His name is Lahiri Mahashai. Does it look like he's floating? It should, because he used to float. He literally would levitate. They'd find him surrounded by a bright halo of light and floating 3 or 4 feet above the floor. And this is the kind of being you would find, in India doing this kind of work. And I think that the power here lies in the fact that in the West, all we've been taught about is Jesus. Just Jesus, nothing but Jesus, okay? The Master Jesus, who, by the way, I have a great and deep love and devotion for. So I'm not in any way putting that down. But it's like, isn't it so wonderful to know that we've got a huge, huge family? This is our elder brother too, just as the Master Jesus is. I mean, why stop at one? That's the deal. You get into the Christian thing and it's so limited. It's like a desert. You know, there's only one Master, Jesus, that's it. Oh, wow. I'm hungry already. You know? I want a buffet. Don't tell me I can only have one thing, no matter how wonderful it is. So you get into this whole wonderful consciousness where you find this happening. It's very, very, very beautiful. This is a statue of one of the Hindu gods known as the Lord Ganesha. The Lord Ganesha, often depicted as part human, part elephant, is the Lord of the removing of obstacles from one's path. In Hindu lore, as in many of the other cultures that have existed, you find that there are many gods and goddesses, and they all have different purposes or reasons. Go to the Native Americans, go to the Hawaiians. They had different gods and goddesses for different purposes. The Great White Brotherhood sponsors all of them. That is the main point, I think, that we'd really like to make with tonight's lecture and slideshow, is that let us open our minds. Let us not say it is this and not that. Let us realize that God is all things, multifaceted, multi-leveled, and that God, if we want to use that term, has and is all of these things that have ever appeared to humanity, each one offering a step forward and upward toward a greater light. It's a wonderful concept, I think, and very Aquarian at that. India continues to give us its holy men and women. This particular being walked the same path as so many have walked before him. His name was Muktananda. They called him Baba Muktananda. This particular being went through all of those wonderful, 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 joyous phases of self-realization, one step after another, unveiling one revelation after another, all the while following his heart, all the while coming into a greater understanding that his self, the S with the capital S, was God, the divine. His destiny brought him to the United States in the late 1970s, I believe. And he began a thing called Siddha Yoga, which to this day exists with his successor by the name of Chidvilasananda. People call her Guru Mai. She's alive to this day. So is he, for that matter. But he's dropped the body. He doesn't need it anymore. It's like a car, you run out of it, you go. I have had a wonderful, wonderful contact with him. I never met this wonderful being, but I've met so many of his devotees, I feel like I know him personally. Dear, sweet, wonderful soul. Here's another one. Still physically incarnate today. His name is Satya Sai Baba. This particular being, very deep, very powerful, alive today. Some call him an avatar. Many people consider him an incarnation divine. This man, in case you've never known of him or heard of him or met him, is a total living miracle. He's omniscient, for one thing, which means he knows everything about you. The minute you walk up to him, he knows everything about you. Now, for those of you who don't know the difference, this goes beyond what we call clairvoyance, okay? Clairvoyance is an ability of the soul to see into situations, and you do have to take a certain amount of time and energy to do that. There's a higher level, and it's called omniscience. You don't have to see anything, you just know. You know everything. He happens to be at that level. If he wants to, all he has to do is wave his hand, and out of the ethers he draws whatever he wants and materializes it. This happens daily, many, many, many times. I've seen it on film. I've met many, many people who've gone to visit him. I have seen him in vision. He's a very real and wonderful being. His name is Satya Sai Baba. And to this day, he's like right this minute, he's in India right now. It's probably morning or something over there. He's over there watching over his devotees and being a living example of what happens when a person is completely immersed in their God consciousness. This is a very wonderful, sweet being. Her name is, well, we call her Amachi. She is a feminine aspect of the same. Also a very miraculous being. She's been known to heal things like leprosy, cancer, and other things just by her touch. She's an incarnation of love. She brings wonderful, wonderful experiences to people who've never had such an exposure. So such has been the wonderful contribution from India and of India that we've had for all these centuries. It continues to bless us, believe me. For those of you who have never experienced India, who've never wanted to look there, who have no knowledge of it, I really urge you to pick up a book, go somewhere, find out something about it. Believe me, it's a whole other world, and one that I think you would be very blessed to look into. It's so interesting that it was out of India that in the late 1800s there came one more wonderful, shall I say, effort to enlighten the West. It happened to occur to a woman, a Russian woman by the name of Madame Blavatsky. Madame Blavatsky was a mystic. She was drawn to India, to Tibet, which by the way at that time they didn't let women go in, don't ask me why. She dressed up as a man. She got in anyway. And she met there because she was drawn to meet some very wonderful, enlightened beings who happen to be still in the physical body. And you refer to these people as unascended masters. This was one of them. This is an actual photograph of one of them, taken in the late 1800s. His name at that time was Kuthumi Lal Singh. This is the Master Kuthumi. And he trained her along with the Master Moria, and they enlightened her to so very many things. So very, very many things. They told her that there had been a whole new history than anything she had ever learned about. This was the other master that trained her. She was under the tutelage of both of them. His name is Moria. His name at the time was El Moria Khan. Some of you who are sensitive spiritually and psychically may realize one thing, that every single image you're seeing tonight, every single picture you're seeing tonight of these beings is radiating to you a blessing and an acceleration and something that will help you in your spiritual life. It's called Darshan, the blessing of sitting in the presence of an enlightened soul. El Moria, like Kuthumi, the master before, had been one of the major astrologers who came to see the Master Jesus at the time of his birth. They taught Madame Blavatsky that the history of the world went back way further than what science claimed that it did. They taught her that, oh, is this too loud? They taught her that the history of the world went back a lot further, billions of years. This being that you're seeing before you, you might almost call a space being. This being came from the planet of Venus. His name is Sanat Kumara. He came here millions of years ago because the earth plane, can you turn it up? I can't do that. He came here millions of years ago because nobody else could hold the energy that it took to, keep the planet going. In the work of the Great White Brotherhood, a lot of it happens when people are out of their physical body, just like most of you are right now. You're a little bit out of your physical bodies. I can feel it. I can sense it. That's okay. Don't worry. Just don't fall asleep all the way. Okay? But what I'm really saying, and it's really quite true, is that this information that we're talking about, the frequency of it is higher than the earthly marketplace. It's higher than what you're going to encounter when you wake up and have your coffee and your toast. You understand? So naturally, when you get in touch with it, there's a part of you that starts to move out of your physical body. It's called, you start to go to sleep. That's normal. It's natural. It's okay. If you've been going out that way, it's all right. But you know what? I'm asking you to hold a balance, if you will. Because you're getting a chance to sit tonight on a council that you normally would not. In fact, this opportunity that is happening right this minute is not going to happen again. This won't happen again. You won't have this opportunity again for who knows how long. Really, I mean, that's not like a threat. Don't worry. But it's a true observation. I mean it. I really mean it. So those of you who are in tune and in touch with what I'm saying right now, please come to realize that this is the nature, this is what's happening, this is why you're in the state you're in. This is normally the state you're in when you receive this information. It's out of the body. You're normally asleep. So if you feel like you're going to sleep, that's the reason. Okay, I'm not trying to say, wake up, I'm going to go on with a ruler and whack you on the knuckles. I don't have to do that. But come to know that that's okay. It's okay to be in that twilight zone state. It's really all right to be there. Just don't fall asleep. Okay, because you won't hear this again in the conscious. You won't hear this through your eardrums again for probably a long time. These things happen, from time to time. For whatever reason, the Brotherhood goes, okay, open it up, and this night, give it to them consciously. Those who are meant to hear, let them hear. And people find their way here. That happens, but it doesn't happen often. I'm sharing this with you because I've also had opportunities that have been shared with me, and I didn't realize it at the time. And I wasn't quite there for it. And you know what? And then later I thought, boy, I wish that would happen again. Didn't happen again. Didn't happen for 5 years. Didn't happen for 10 years. Didn't happen for 15 years. Didn't happen for 25 years. That's a long time to wait. Get it? Okay, good. Thought so. All right. Okay, let's continue, shall we? Okay, we are looking at Sanat Kumara. Who is Sanat Kumara? An incredibly beautiful, vast being from the planet Venus, our sister planet, who came to this planet a long time ago and held a certain energy force so the rest of us could keep evolving and incarnating. Now, somehow that doesn't maybe mean a whole lot right now, but what I'm telling you is that there have always been beings who have held the light until somebody else could come along and hold the light for them. What you may not realize, my dear, dear friends and brothers and sisters, is this, that your drudgery, your tedium, sometimes the price that has to be paid has to do with another soul who can come along and do what you are doing. Who is going to take over your position in hierarchy? That's the question. Think about it. If there's anybody that you can talk to, that's open, that you can share with, that you can train, that you can inspire, think about it. Because the sooner somebody else can step into your shoes, you can move on. That's the key. Sanat Kumara found a being like that 4.5 million years ago. His name was Lord Gautama Buddha. Gautama Buddha took over that position and held that light for the earth plane. Guess what? Because nobody else could do it. Nobody was that strong. No one was that strong. But Lord Gautama Buddha was. That's what he was able to do. Now, as you all know, there are many, many, many different types of Buddhism. They've essentially all come from the same. It's interesting, some people think of Buddhism as a philosophy, others as a religion. It doesn't matter, either way. But the point is that there was a being who took another path. Now, why did he depart from Hinduism? Essentially, Lord Gautama Buddha, the first Buddha, was a Hindu. He was a Brahmin. He was born in India. Why did he become a so-called Buddhist? Well, you would have asked him, he wouldn't have said he was a Buddhist. by the way. It didn't exist in those days. The point is that he took a new path because it's the nature of the Great White Brotherhood to create more and more paths. So there's a path for every single person in this room and on the planet. There is another being that was his brother and who still is. And this is just an artist's rendition. It may look a bit like Jesus to you, but his real name is the Lord Maitreya. Maitreya. If you are familiar with Buddhism, you'll hear about a so-called coming Buddha, or the Buddha who is yet to come. This would be him. His name is Lord Maitreya. Lord Maitreya held a very high office known as that of the Cosmic Christ. He was the guru of the Master Jesus. He was the one that the Master Jesus was looking to. Now, he was not the one that the Master Jesus referred to as the Father. So let's get that clear, okay? When the Master Jesus referred to the Father, he was talking into, you could say, the Father God element. There's names for him as well. But the Lord Maitreya was his personal teacher and guru. And what isn't very well understood is that the Lord Maitreya literally possessed the body of the Master Jesus. And in that sense, the Master Jesus was a medium. A most wonderful medium, a medium nonetheless. There were times when the Master Jesus would be used directly by the Lord Maitreya to teach, to heal, to so-called do miracles and things. And people don't get that distinction, you see. Our Christian brothers and sisters especially don't get that distinction. If I told them this, they'd be up in arms and say I'm a heretic or a God knows what. Who knows what they'd tell me. But the point is they wouldn't be happy with it because they like to think that Jesus is the Son of God, the end all and be all, and that's it. And they just like to leave it at that. It simplifies things, doesn't it? You don't have to think too much after that. But yes.
In the period of the lost years of Jesus, is that when he met up with his guru?
During the lost years of Jesus, which are about 18 or so, the Master Jesus was traveling, through the Orient, into India, Tibet, Nepal, Egypt, and Persia, to develop what was already in him as an adept. And it was during that time when he did make contact with the Lord Maitreya, that's true. Though it is said that when he returned to his homeland, to Palestine, at the point when he was baptized by his own cousin, John the Baptist, that at that point the Lord Maitreya completely took possession of him. And he was heard to say, I and my Father are one. That's what that was about. It was part of the mission of the Master Jesus to be subject to every human weakness, just like we are, for the obvious purpose of showing us that if he could do it, we could do it. So it is understood that he went through his trials and his times when he felt not completely supported, not completely surrounded by spirit, and so on. I think this painting is trying to depict that. We've all had our bad days, haven't we? But he did what we all are destined to do sooner or later, which is come out of it smelling like a rose, which is, of course, what he did, literally. And that he came to that place where he achieved that level of complete Christhood, where he could say, I and my Father are one. And has been that ever since, probably one of the most intimate of all the masters from the ascended point of view that has still been ministering unto the planet Earth. He didn't do it alone. He had help. There were beings who worked with him very closely. This is just an artist's rendition of the Master Kuthumi. And Kuthumi happened to be one of the astrologers, as I said, who came to see him at the time of his birth. This is called the Lord Mahachohan. He is the representative of what we call the Holy Spirit, a very powerful Indian master. When Jesus said, if I do not leave you, the Holy Spirit cannot come unto you, he was referring to this particular master. They all work together. They really do. This is the Lord Hilarion. This particular master was once around the Master Jesus during the time when he had been known as Saul of Tarsus. He was a persecutor of the early Christian church until he was converted by the Master himself with a blast of white light. His name then became Hilarion. He woke up and realized he was a whole different being, and from that moment on they called him Paul. He was the great Apostle Paul. The Lady Master Mary. Very interesting. Any of you who know much about the history of the Christian church, especially the Roman Catholic Church, you will know that up until about the 1500s, there was no such thing as any other religion but the Roman Catholic Church. There was only one Christian religion, and that was called Catholicism. A monk by the name of Martin Luther one day jumped up and decided he didn't like what was going on, and he had a lot of gripes with the church, which I don't blame. But one of the gripes he had, of all things, I don't know where he got this, was he felt the church was paying way too much attention to the Lady Master Mary, and that she was not really important at all. She was just some little Jewish girl that lucked out and had the savior of the world, you know. I mean, essentially it's what he said. You know, she was of no consequence at all. Well, we happen to know different. It's not just anybody that ends up being the mother of someone like that, okay, who's destined to change the history of the planet. She herself was from what we call the level of the archangels, and obviously was trained very intensely so that she could be the mother of the Master Jesus. She's been one of the most active of all the masters of the Great White Brotherhood since then, because she is the, shall I say, forerunner of the rise of the feminine ray. She's the one who is, that's why it's been so important, and it's so important to keep her in focus, because she represents the feminine side of divinity that we cannot forget. And in fact, nowadays more than ever, we really can't forget it, because that's what's really coming forth. She took her own ascension at the end of that life, completely uniting with her divine self, and that is why, since then, she has been free to materialize in many, many, many places. You all know she's, appeared in many, many spots. I think it's very interesting that the Lady Master Mary, for all her appearances, has very rarely ever appeared in a church. You ever notice that? She's appeared in fields, poor people, children usually, all kinds of things. Why doesn't she appear in the Vatican? How come she hasn't appeared to the Pope? Anyone can tell me that? I don't know. And yet they claim they act like she's their property. You know, she's the property of the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, they're Mother Blessed Virgin Mary. Well, fortunately, that's not true. She's appeared in all kinds of places. In the 1400s, I think, she appeared in Mexico to an Indian man called Juan Diego. Very humble man. It was in the middle of winter. Suddenly he was confronted by this glowing light. She appeared to be hovering over a cactus near what today is Mexico City. And she spoke to him in his own language, which was not Spanish, but an Indian dialect, and said that she wanted a temple built there where she was. And she looked just like this when she appeared to him. He, of course, was very, in awe on his knees, and said, "They'll never believe me. I'm just a poor Indian. They'll never believe me." She said, "Go to the bishop of Mexico City. Go to the bishop. Tell him that I want a temple here." He went. Of course, he was rebuked and told he was a fool and hallucinating, ate mushrooms, whatever, and sent away. So he went back. She appeared again and said, "You want proof? I will give it to you. Go over there and find that there will be roses. Put them in your mantle and go take them to the bishop." He said, "But this is winter. Roses are not growing." She said, "Go." Well, he went and found a rose bush full of roses, picked the roses, put them in his mantle, went to the bishop, and when he opened it, they fell out and this image was on his cloak. And thank God the bishop had the sense to realize something was going on. How could this kid, there wasn't no Xerox in those days, you understand? And how in the world could this poor, humble Indian, Juan Diego, come up with this? And I think they began to listen to him after that. It's very beautiful, the whole story. And they began building it. And today it's called the Basilica, and they call her the Virgin of Guadalupe. And that's what you're looking at. This is a picture of that very thing. Mother Mary has been so wonderful in her consistency. She appeared to Bernadette Soubirous in 1849 in France and told her where to dig in the ground for a spring that would come up that has healed thousands of people. She appeared to 3 children in Fatima in Portugal and there gave these promises that have all come true, that Russia would be converted. It was right about 1917, and the Bolshevik Revolution was just going on, so it didn't look that way. And now, as we know, Russia has, in fact, things have changed. There have been many, many wonderful things with her, so, it's just one of those beautiful, beautiful things. One thing that we need to know about the Lady Master Mary is that early in the life in which she was the mother of Jesus, as some of you may know, there was a plot to kill the child Jesus by the King Herod of Palestine. And an angel came to the father Joseph and said, take this woman and child and go to Egypt. And they went there. And they received training in the mysteries of Egypt for some time. So let us not forget the wonderful mystical tradition of Egypt, because it definitely plays a part in all of this. This is one of the masters that's normally associated with Egypt. His name is Serapis Bey. This is an artist's rendition of Serapis Bey. I've seen others. It's a wonderful one. This master is connected with what we call the Brotherhood of Luxor. There are brotherhoods and sisterhoods that honeycomb this planet. Get that very clear, my friends. There's not just one association anywhere. Every country has its higher-ups and its spiritual giants who oversee the growth of that country and often interact with people in other places. This is another master by the name of Paul the Venetian. Paul the Venetian is associated with what we call the pink ray, which has to do with beauty and love and art. And he is the inspiration for artists throughout the planet. So if you're an artist or an aspiring one, this is the man you want to talk to. You can go see him when you go to sleep. Okay? Don't go to sleep here. But once you do, Paul the Venetian. He was once an Italian artist by the name of Paolo Veronese. And you'll find his works hanging, like even in the New York Museum of Art. I have stood right 2 inches away from some of his work. And that was, of course, his last incarnation before he attained that thing that we call the Ascension, where they merge with that higher self that we all will one day, and you just don't come back to the earth plane because you don't need to. You can come back at will, but it's not a necessity. This is an artist's rendition of one of the masters who is very important these days, and his name is the Master Saint Germain. This particular artist rendition has to do with the fact that there was a time when Saint Germain incarnated as probably the most famous magician of history by the name of Merlin. He was Merlin. Taliesin, Merlin. During the time of King Arthur. King Arthur was a very real being. That was one of the incarnations of the Master Moria, of the master I showed you before. Moria was one of the astrologers, as I said, that came to see the Master Jesus, as was Kuthumi. The Master Saint Germain was incarnated at the time as the man called Joseph, the father of the Master Jesus. So you see, they keep it in the family, believe me. It's all together. It's all together. It's so beautiful. He's an incredibly wonderful being. He has had many incarnations since then. But this particular artist painting depicts him as the Wonder Man of Europe. You will find actual accounts of this in some of the documented histories of the very famous royal families of Europe. He showed up in the courts of Europe in this late 1700s he was called himself the Count Saint-Germain. Le Comte de Saint-Germain was his name. He showed up in France. He came in as an extremely wealthy man, wearing diamonds on all fingers, could speak any language, play any instrument, do anything. Nobody knew who he was. They didn't know what to do with him. He was richer than anybody. What to do with a person like that? He was richer than the king. He would take flaws out of the king's jewels. And he was very interested in uniting the crown heads of Europe. But guess what? They weren't going for it. They were a little too pompous, a little too, proud. Oh, I'm not going to deal with her, even though her was probably his cousin, because, in those days they were all related, right? Well, he came as this wonderful being. He actually came, one of his last appearances was to Marie Antoinette. He told her that the French Revolution was coming, that if she didn't change the policy of France, don't forget she's famous for that saying, let them eat cake. I don't know if you all know the story of France, but there was a time when she was being ridden through the streets of Paris, and there was like a bread line, basically. The people didn't have any, She said, why are those people in line? And the driver, trying to be diplomatic, goes, well, they don't have any bread. Well, then let them eat cake, was her very, airhead reply. It shows how well in touch she was with her people, right? Well, that soon toppled the whole French trip. And no headway with the countries of Europe. He turned his attention to the struggling colonists that were trying to unite in this new place over here called the United States. And he rallied them together, literally appearing in a closed session of Congress as a so-called famous man at the back of the room. There was hesitation to sign the Declaration of Independence because they realized this was going to mean war. And suddenly this man appeared out of nowhere and gave this incredibly beautiful, fiery speech about the destiny of America. And he said, sign that document. And he pounded his fist on the table. And he was so inspiring and moving that this man called John Hancock jumped up. He must have been an Aries. Couldn't stop. Jumped up and grabbed that quill and goes, I'll sign it so big that, George III will see it without his spectacles. And that's why you get people say, put your John Hancock right here. Because he put his name that big. That's how inspired he was. When they turned around, he was gone. Such is the Master Saint Germain. A wonderful, wonderful, wonderful being. He inspired the waltzes of Strauss. In fact, the waltz itself, which we're listening to musically, is his vibration set to music, if you want to know that. His color is violet. And one day, in 1932, I believe, a man was hiking on this mountain called Mount Shasta. And suddenly, he felt an electric shock go through him. And he turned around, and there was a young man standing next to him who he had not seen, dressed like a hiker like him, because he was about to get some water out of a stream, this hiker. And suddenly the mysterious young man said, if you will give me your cup, I'll fill it with something much more refreshing than spring water. So he held his cup out. It was filled with this liquid. He drank it, and the hair on his head stood up. What? And Saint Germain, who that was, said, what you just drank was liquid life. And that began his instruction. It was very beautiful. He started what's called the I Am activity. He began to give a wonderful course of teaching from that moment on, which stays with us to this day. You see the theme here. The Brotherhood is with us. They're with us before, they're with us now, they're with us in the future. There's no end to it. It's all about how much we want to seek them out, believe me. One of the teachings Saint Germain gave was that there is within each one of us what's called a magic presence. He called it the I Am, which would be depicted by the higher figure above here. and that there was a mediator, or what they called a Christ self. And then finally there was the so-called lower self, or the conscious personality, and that we were in fact all of them put together. He taught many wonderful things, and he taught about this very mysterious substance called violet flame. He said that in the universe where the color violet and the element of fire meet, there is a stuff called violet fire, which has the unique property of burning up energy patterns and freeing up, shall we say, matrices of energy. And that to think about it was to draw it into you, and to say I am was to release a creative energy. He taught many, many, many things. You might be interested in looking into that. It's called the I am activity. He taught that when you say the words I am, you release an incredible flood of creative energy, and be careful what you say after that, because it will come to pass usually eventually. He taught that you could invoke the presence of what he called violet flame angels into any situation to change things and bring things about. It's so amazing, when we think about these things. It's basically what these beings are doing is say, look, all of this is available to you. It's right there for you. Just work with it, draw it, use it. And I'll admit, even someone like myself, who I'm conversant with some of these subjects, I forget it a lot. I really do. And so it helps me to just share it with you, because I'm remembering it myself, believe me. It's very wonderful. I had an experience with Saint Germain. In fact, I've had several. I was once hiking, interestingly enough, with a friend of mine who knew very little or nothing about any of this, by the way. And we sat down to rest. It was hot. It was very hot. I was in California at the time. And suddenly, out of the blue, my friend said to me, oh, by the way, would you tell me about Saint Germain? And I was so amazed, because I thought, why would he ask me this? It's like, your next door neighbor walking up, asking you. I was like, what? I just couldn't get it. And what finally happened was that I began remembering an experience I just had with the Master Saint Germain. It was quite amazing, actually, quite powerful. What happened was that I remembered that I had just recently been in Saint Germain's house. I found myself in this huge mansion somewhere up high in the mountains, and that suddenly this wonderful being had walked in, Saint Germain himself, and asked me why I had summoned him there. And of course I was afraid, actually. I said, God, I didn't remember summoning you. And next thing I knew, I had this book in my hand, and he looked at it, and he pulled it out of my hand, and it was like the record of all of my sins, or the bad things I'd done, And he looked at it without even opening it. He read it. He just looked at it and he read it. And he said, "Do you want to see what I do with these?" And he threw it across the room into this fire distance, and the fire went purple and just burned it up. And he said, "Now you have no excuse for not doing your best." And he goes, "What does it take to prove my love to you?" I was speechless. Then he walked out, and that was the end of it. And I related all this to my friend, with whom I'm on the hike. And as I finished the words, I looked at him, and I realized he wasn't even listening to me. And I looked at him, and I said, "Did you hear what I said?" He goes, "Huh?" And suddenly I realized Saint Germain had somehow prompted him to ask me that question, to get me to remember what had just happened. It had nothing to do with my friend. That's how he works, by the way. He's known as the master of the Aquarian age, the age we're just entering, so he's very, very significant. He has a guru, which an artist chose to try and depict here. I know it's kind of dark. That being is known as the Great Divine Director, and he holds all of our divine plan, everything you're supposed to do, in his mind. Just think. Called the Great Divine Director. What a memory. So this Master Saint Germain is very close with us, and is the master that will be most closely associated with us for the next 2,000 years as we enter the Aquarian age, just as the Master Jesus has been for the last 2,000. So he has been a great, great exponent of what we call soul freedom. This is a being by the name of Archangel Michael. The Catholic Church talks about him. He's a very real being. I know this sounds a little strange, maybe almost slightly morbid. I hope I don't freak anyone out, but During the 1940s, there was a very real experience that occurred in St. Louis, Missouri, of a young boy who became possessed. That story was written about and a movie was made out of it called The Exorcist. That terrible movie, which I wish I hadn't seen, but I did, was of course a Hollywood depiction of a very real case that actually happened. When that demon was finally cast out of that boy after many terrible trials, many people across that city saw a vision of Archangel Michael casting out the devil, you might say, just up in the atmosphere. At the same day that that thing left his body and never again came back. So, we have to take a note of these things that, we like to think that maybe, our world is very solid and we get up and go to work and do these things. But really, all of that is just a prop and a stage against the reality of our spiritual selves. We now come to a place in the Aquarian age where we can begin to accept that in our own homes we can have points of invocation, points of devotion. This is a statue of Kuan Yin that we have in our home. This is something that I see in the future in everyone's home. I think in the future we're going to see fewer and fewer of what I like to call meaningless knickknacks on people's walls and get down to things that mean something. Because, everything you have in your home is constantly shedding an influence upon you. This is the last slide in our show. This one depicts what occurs every year. The full moon of May approximately is called the Wesak festival. This is a time when the great masters of the Great White Brotherhood, who are depicted by those white robed beings down there, meet in a place in Tibet. And there the great Lord of the world, who once was Gautama Buddha, manifests and releases a great, great charge of energy, which they in turn release to the rest of us. This coincides with springtime in the northern hemisphere, and it tends to bring a great resurgence of growth. But more than that, it gives like a great wave of power that causes us all to reach into higher levels of our own evolution. So this entire presentation has been about the efforts of the Great White Brotherhood from the beginning of time up to the present hour to keep us encouraged, inspired, inspired, to keep us clear and knowing that we are not alone, that this outer world of appearances and material values, especially in the Western Hemisphere, is just a prop, a challenge, something to keep you on your toes so you can keep remembering who you really are and the divinity that lies within each one of us. And I think it is for that purpose that it was suggested that I share it with you all again tonight. So I'm very, very grateful for the great beings who have, each one of them shed their darshan, their blessing, as we have watched their images parade across the screen. And I just want to share with you all a great love and sincerity in, our mutual love and joy of these things. I invite you to investigate these topics. They're not that easy to be found, I'll admit. Many of the books that would tell you about them are either not easy to find or out of print, but it's like anything. Where effort is made, reward must follow. So thank you for your kind attention, and I love you, and God bless you all.